Welcome back. You're watching Dúchascápaí TV and I'm Darren McDermott. Well, polls have opened in Egypt for the presidential elections, with over 53 million people eligible to vote. I'm joined today by Francois Aubert, an expert on the Middle East. Francois, welcome today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back.
So, looking at the elections in Egypt, now former Army Chief General al-Sisi is actually expected to win. So do you think he is the right person for the job? And would you be concerned about human rights issues and potential riots actually breaking out?
Well, it's probably the end of a parenthesis. We tend in Europe to look at the situation in other countries with our own eyes. So when we had the Arab Spring, we thought, hey, democracy finally get there. But democracy is maybe not what they need, and actually every Muslim in the planet is learning from day one that if there's a group of people alone, one must take the lead. So they have the habits of that leadership. So when we had the Arab Spring, notably in Egypt, I had a lot of, the old wise people in Egypt telling me, boy, we're getting to a mess. And actually we had a mess. Of course, we had elections, but the elections led nowhere. And suddenly some strong man came in, General al-Sisi, and took over, and now there is an election that he will probably win with a big majority, and we're actually back where we were 3 years ago. The army is in control. Will we have some issues? Yes, probably. I guess no more, no less than under President Mubarak. So we will have some issues, but the country will be managed and the confidence will be back. So can we have some concerns? Yes. But this is the future. And by the way, there is a kind of silent blessing from the Europeans and the Americans who are not saying it's bad or whatever. They're just accepting the fate, and they're just accepting the fact that Egypt will be back where it was 3 years ago. And when you look at the other countries, Libya and Tunisia, maybe finally the Egyptian solution is not the worst one of the three.
And Francois, in terms of economic developments, now how exactly could this have an impact on the economy and of course on tourism?
Well, economy needs to have a stable ground, and we see that even in neighboring France, where the constant changes of regulations makes lack of confidence for people to invest. It's the same in Egypt. So it's good for the business in general to have a system that works. And economy, at the end of the day, if we look at the whole world, they are not really concerned by human rights and other things of that sort. For the tourism, it's pretty much the same. I mean, anyone who wants to go on holiday somewhere would like to make sure that it will be quiet. And the fact the army is again in control will probably guarantee that. I will be extremely surprised to see riots. I will be extremely surprised to see real security issues. I think that we're just back where we were 3 years ago with a new team in place, and hopefully for the best of the Egyptians, who, by the way, themselves want to have that stability because they're just tired with all the changes. In addition, I will say that there is the cultural aspect. Why Sisi could come back to lead the country? It's because the freedom of the Egyptians were put at stake. For an Egyptian being forced, for an Egyptian woman being forced to have a veil and, to follow a very strict approach of the Muslim religion was just out of question. So it must be understood that it's also the Egyptian people who are very happy with the situation as it is evolving now.
And Francois, moving over to the relationship between Russia and the US, it has been very stressed and strained recently. Now, it has actually pretty much reached one of its lowest points since the Cold War. So how could this have an impact on Iran and Syria?
Well, I think that there are a few things. First, the Ukraine case came as a surprise. I think it was very naive from anyone to believe that President Putin will not take back Crimea. I mean, for him, if you look at the history, it is just making sense. So we had a lot of noise made, but at the end of the day, if we look at the situation today, Ukraine is not yet solved, although there is now a new person in charge and maybe they will be able to negotiate something out. But I think that we have to look at the whole situation. And the whole situation is Russian, American negotiating together to try to solve Syria and to solve Iran. Let's start with Syria. It seems that currently the idea of President Assad taking over back the country is accepted, I will say. Whether it's pleasing people or not, whether they're saying in the press it is unacceptable, at the end of the day, there is no concrete action against Assad gaining back, and this is exactly what's happening. And Homs was a very interesting case. 2 years of siege, finally they freed the city, or the remains of the city, because if you look at what remains of the city, if you look at the pictures, it's quite terrible. But it clearly, Assad is getting back the control over Syria, and it seems that again everybody is happy about it. Maybe not some of the countries funding the radical groups, but all the others are happy, and that includes American and Russia, as your flag shows. When it comes to Iran, the negotiations continue to take place, and whether it will be within the deadline, I'm not sure, but I'm absolutely convinced both countries want to get to Iran to an end. So I'm quite confident there are negotiations behind the curtain. We don't know much about it, but I will not be surprised that at some stage there will be some announcement saying that we are one step right in the right direction and we're moving on. So I think that's clearly, on paper, there are some differences. Clearly, President Obama must have a certain behavior compared to the American people. Clearly, President Putin is at the all high in terms of popularity in Russia because he was just strong. But beyond that, I think there is a real will to negotiate and to bring all these issues to an end the best way possible, I will say.
And Francois, moving south, now let's have a look at Nigeria, Libya, Sudan. What sort of developments are we witnessing here, and what are your major concerns?
I think the key element here is the Sahel, which is the orange bit on that picture. I mean, for centuries, it is a smuggling route. Everything was smuggled. From that picture, you see that currently some drugs is coming in and then moving to Europe, but also some weapons. We gave so many weapons to the Libyans during the war. These weapons, and this is the purple arrow, went to Mali, but then is all across the region. So it gives a lot of tensions. It gives ground to a lot of tensions because, of course, we have Mali. We know now because we could follow in the press, but also the north of Nigeria that unfortunately is now being seen regularly. We have issues to Central Africa. We can't see on the map, but same thing. New weapons are there. And of course, Sudan is also at stake. So we have a problem because that zone historically was never really controlled. And we know that there are a lot of extremism, who knows very well the area, and who has now a lot of very modern weapons. And they can be an issue of all the neighboring countries over there. So that gives a lot of possibilities. And we also know that from there, they could fly to Syria, for instance. We know that in Syria, we have a lot of foreigners fighting. And to any other countries where there are fights. So that is the major problem is we will probably never get back those weapons because here it looks like a thin area, but we're talking about all Africa, so it's a quite long way. And we're talking about an area that is not just sand, it's mountains, and we saw that again in Mali in the news. You know, they have a lot of hidden places. So we are out of control, and there is currently a lot of growth happening in Africa. I mean, all the countries south of the Sahel are currently living a certain good economical situation, although there are some little issues these days in terms of cash in Nigeria. But in general, they are pretty much booming. And just close to them, there is that zone of instability that is hardly controllable. And this is made with, weapons that are quite modern because given by the Europeans 3 years ago through Libya. So I think that the major concern here and we will have to try to maintain that as much as possible. But it's quite a challenge. And if you add this with money that can come from some countries in the Gulf, and what we can hear if you read the press and the blogs and everything is that the Qataris and the Saudis might well be financing some of these fights. You have the money, you have the weapons, you have trouble. And this is something that is serious and has to be managed as well as possible. And this is what countries are trying to do, but it's not as easy as it looks.
Francois, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching Dukascopy TV. Now, if you liked this interview, then make sure you click back to the website for many more like it. Goodbye for now.